since you guys have successfully gone through the ASTM process once and now you're going through it again, what are some challenges that you faced with the process that you think other producers should be aware of?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, one thing is that the greatest challenge is it's a different world in ASTM. Now, I think JP really stated beautifully that ASTM is first and foremost safety, and there is no work around safety. Sustainability is important, that is safety. So, typically many of the fuel producers would kind of like rush in and hey, we need, and start discussing, hey, we need this because it's sustainability, it's sustainable. And probably the first blow they take is that they'll be corrected to, call their fuel SAF. It's not SAF in the ASTM community. It's not sustainable aviation fuel. It's synthetic aviation turbine fuel. And you have to understand that difference, and that difference in, let's say, thinking that you're actually entering this ASTM qualification process, which means it may risk this, aviation safety. And if you really underestimate that, you go through some baptism of fire, and you'll go through this, elongated qualification process. And understanding that is very, very key and important.
Same question for you, David. What are some challenges Lysella is facing going through the process?
So I think probably the key challenge which we saw was we started the engagement back in 2023, and the key challenge that we came up against was not having enough data. That the ASTM really needed to understand what type of product we had, what were the characteristics of that product, how it was produced. So providing the level of detail that the ASTM required in order for them to make an early assessment was part of the challenge for us. I think that was in a couple of years ago. Our projects were still being built. They weren't necessarily in production as yet. So that was probably the key challenge, I think. And the feedback that we got from ASTM was, you're not quite ready. You need to have some more data to sort of back up some of the claims that you're making before we can really get into the process. So I think, the message for people trying to go into the process is make sure you have the right data. It echoes what JP said. Really making sure you've got a good set of data where you can have a meaningful discussion about what is the right pathway, what is the testing requirements, so on and so on.
JP, would you add anything to what David said about what would ensure that producers have the right information and are ready to go through the process?
No, I think they both need to. But we try to improve the process all the time. So now you have access to this clearinghouse, to the pre-screening. So these are tools that we encourage you to use, because the process, we want to make the process as endless as possible. And the only way to do it is to come prepared with the right data, the right, so data speaks, it's all about data and ensuring that we are safe. So this is, be prepared. Yeah.
So we're really echoing what Ryan said earlier. There's no sustainability without safety. And
Absolutely.
another question for our field producers. Are there parts of the process that you found there wasn't enough information available? And what kind of information about the ASTM process would be helpful for producers who are looking to qualify a new fuel?
Yeah, thanks. One thing is, well, once you're in the community, you're accepted in the community. It's very straightforward, and as JP explained, it's a very straightforward process. That this is more like my real life story. But once you're in this process, it's not really as straightforward. It's been projected. And one thing is that again, ASTM is a community of not only OEMs. So many people, many fuel producers come in with the misunderstanding. So hey, we have similar fuel that's, we have good combustion, capability. So we're good with fuel. But that's not the case. For technology, it's a community of academia. There's OEMs, engine manufacturers and aircraft manufacturers, airframers, and also also fuel producers and fuel distributors, fuel operators, and those people have their technological interests of their own, and you have to be able to understand those. What are the key elements that's going to go under scrutiny, and understanding that requires some experience, and it's not really readily available around in like a PowerPoint around on the internet. And the ASTM community is making a lot of effort, doing some, outside U.S., community outreach in Belgium just recently, April, and they're making effort, but at the same time, fuel producer has to be modest and be able to learn from all the information that's available, and if there's no information available, you have to access it, like JP said, you have to be modest and access to the clearinghouse. You cannot make decision by yourself. You have to, listen in to what people in the ASAP are saying. So that may be the challenge, I'll say.
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges, is truly understanding the timeframes. I think really getting a good hold of when you try to plan a project, when you try to plan pipelining projects, and you're wanting to understand how quickly can you get to FID, what are the steps you have to go through, what are the hurdles you have to go through. I think probably the majority of early stage producers and developers would significantly underestimate the amount of time and effort and cost that is actually involved in going through the process, because you do have to, speak to so many different members of that community and different stakeholders that have different commercial interests, that have different technical interests, all of those different types of things. So I think if it's quite clear in terms of, and it's very difficult, I think, for the ASTM community to give guidance in terms of how long a process can take, because it's almost dependent on the producer to be, working proactively with them. So they might give a guide, and there's certainly guidance around what those timeframes look like and the cost and the volumes that are required for the different. So there's guidelines around that, but ultimately it comes down to what are the different needs that you're trying to, meet in the ASTM community, and that sometimes I think creates uncertainty in a developer's perspective, from a developer's perspective, and makes it very hard to plan all of the other things that you're trying to manage, whether it's a feedstock supply, whether it's an offtake agreement, whether it's an engineering issue. You're trying to balance all these types of things, and it's just another piece of uncertainty that when you go and talk to capital providers, if they wanted to say, well, where you're at with your ASTM process, and we're pretty early in the process, to be fair, but that's going to be a crucial issue for us going forward. When we go and talk to people like all the airlines, and they're going to ask us where you at with your ASTM. Now, luckily, what we decided to do was partner with someone who was very, very experienced with Shell. So Shell, through their network, through their actual experience, is actually lending a lot to our particular process and is really accelerating that process. So my recommendation to others who are looking is don't go alone. If you're wanting to do that, look for a strategic partner who has been along that pathway, can introduce you to the right people, can guide you through the process. So that's what we've done.
Maybe go one click further. When you're planning a project, how will you factor in the ASTM timeline and the costs that are associated with that process?
It's probably the first thing I'd start doing, to be honest. I think, but you have to know what feedstock you're using, and always, and in particular what feedstock. We're lucky because we understand our process from a technology perspective. So we're not a pure developer that's going and choosing an alcohol-to-jet process or an EFA process. We have our own process, so we know that really, really well. But once we've firmed up on the feedstock and we know what the feedstock is, then for us, it's critical that we actually produce the samples that are needed to get us into that process as quickly as possible so that we can actually start that process moving along at pace. And, you know, things like the clearinghouse, you know, the fast track process are things that we look towards to try and accelerate that as quickly as possible.
Time for one more question for JP. What are some challenges in blending neat SAF with fossil jet fuel that blenders should be aware of?
Well, I mean, we see a lot of issue now with SBCs that are not SBCs. So that's a problem we are having. But I said, in terms of the blending, so it is a difficult situation sometimes. So I'm hoping, like we most of the OEM and the community work with organizations such as EI. So I hope everybody is aware of the EI 1533, which is a document that is free of charge on the EI website and deal with these blending issues and blending. So it's all about best practices. And we want to ensure that the process are respected, because the point is when the blending are done, the reclassification to a ASCM D1655 is what matters, to make sure that it's a safe product to put on an airplane. So we see some challenges, but I would say please use the best practices that we have. The I-1533 is free of charge again, so go and use it.
Thank you, and we are at time, so I would like to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise, and anyone in the audience has questions for them, they'll be around, so feel free to bother them. Thank you very much.